So, you ready? Cool. I've got a couple interesting questions here. We did a rum episode. We did an American single malt talking about travel. But this time I want to know more about Moose Allen, how he got involved with Andalusia Distilling, the things that keep him there and can keep him waking up in the middle of the night and going there early in the morning and then coming home late at night. All of those things. But the other thing is Sohan, these tea cakes can seem quite intimidating. How do people process these and turn them into a pot of tea?
Right. So we're in the fermented tea world now. So we talked about it earlier. There's that sixth category, hei cha, the fermented teas, black tea, literally black tea, not what we call black tea, which is oxidized, but actually fermented. And like I mentioned, it's more like a cigar fermenting in a humidor than it is like beer fermenting into beer. And it was the reason that they have these fermented teas is because they would trade them over long distances on these long trade routes. This one specifically was traded on a trade route called the Tea Horse Road, trading tea from China for horses from Central Asia, right? And so that was the exchange. And so you want to transport tea long distances. A little delicate green tea like that duck shit oolong that we just had is not going to make the journey because it will oxidize on the journey. It'll get crushed. And so you want it to have longevity. You want to preserve it. The best way to preserve it is by pressing it into a cake so it doesn't get crushed, and it ferments on its own. It ferments on the road. It's 6 months there, 6 months back. And so you're getting, this is a being. This is like the base unit. It's 357 modern grams. This one's open, but it's a nice tight wrapped little thing. And then they stack those up, 7 beings stacked together as a tong. 12 tongs is a jian. That's 84 cakes. That's worth a horse. And so they'd be transporting this tea from China to Tibet and everywhere along the way, trading these tea cakes for horses. And you just bought 84 cakes of tea for a horse. You're not going to drink them all right away.
Right.
Some of those cakes are sitting there for years, and you're also continuing to circulate them because you break them up and you're like, hey, I got a cake of tea to trade you for this blanket. I'll trade you a couple of cakes of tea for this salt. Whatever.
Okay.
And so these cakes stay in circulation. They're being used as de facto currency. The people who are doing this, they don't need cash money because they're not in a market economy.
Right.
They're eating yaks and stuff like that. They need tea to drink because that's how they digest their meat-heavy diets, and it keeps them from getting like nutrient deficiency diseases. So it's an everyday essential for them, but they can't grow it. They can only trade for it. And so the tea would ferment on the road. This is a modern style of Pu-erh that has been advanced fermented for the purpose of making it taste like it's old. It's called shou Pu-erh as opposed to shung Pu-erh. So originally there was just shung Pu-erh, green tea, big leaf green tea pressed into cakes, and it's going to age and ferment and oxidize on its own, and it's supposed to. Normal green tea, you don't want it to oxidize. It's going bad. Pu-erh, shung Pu-erh, it is green tea, but it's big, it's processed differently, and it ages well. That's what makes it unique.
Okay.
So that was my question. It's pressed into this shape as opposed to steamed or...
It's the loose finished leaves are steamed to make them soft. They're in a sack. They pleat the sack and they twist it around, make a little knot. You can actually see the divot here, maybe. We might have chewed up no, it's still there. You can still see the divot. So you can see that divot there. Mm-hmm. That's where the knot goes in. And then they take it and they press it with a stone.
Okay.
So the good this one might be machine pressed because it's shou Pu-erh, but the shung, traditionally shung Pu-erh would be stone pressed, and our shungs are still stone pressed.
Yeah, we saw you earlier with some kind of knife.
Yeah, this is called a cha dao, tea knife. It can be whatever. You could use a butter knife if you wanted to, or like an oyster knife would work good. But they do make knives purpose built for this thing of breaking open tea cakes, and they have a couple different shapes. But they don't need to be sharp edges. They just need to be pointy so you can get in there. And then here, I don't know if this is visible for y'all.
Yep.
Corey's gonna do the needful.
The zoom.
Yeah.
It's like a letter opener almost.
It's a lot like a letter opener. A letter opener would work fine, except letter openers are usually a bit thicker.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a little bit thinner blade than, and like I said, I like to disabuse people of the idea that you have to have expensive stuff to enjoy tea. You do not. There's lots of cool, neat, handmade, fancy, expensive stuff you can get. And it might enhance your experience in some way or the other, but it's not an obstacle. If you don't have a tea knife, you can literally just break a chunk off of it with your hand. You can use a butter knife. You can use a freaking screwdriver, whatever. It's not going to hurt the tea. So, but yeah, my tea knife. So, Clean my nails. My nails are dirty. Shit, I forgot I was filming today. I was out at the new tea house playing around in that goblin house underneath we got this little goblin door under the new tea house. You can go under the foundation.
Oh, wow.
Under the foundation. I was messing around in there. So you want to come in, usually I'll start from the divot. This divot's already been chipped off most of the way around it. But I see there's a little break here. So in a general sense, you don't want to snap a chunk off the edge because the leaves are laying flat like this. You don't want to break the leaves.
You want to keep layer by layer.
Exactly. So I'm going to come in like this. I like to put my hand over top so that it holds. I don't want this knife snapping out through the cake because that's breaking. I'm not getting a nice chunk off of it. It's just breaking off little dust. I don't want to turn it to dust. So I put my hand over here to stabilize it, and then I lever it up like that, and then I get a little chunk like that, and that's how you break open. And you want some shake. The shaky bits that come off, those are still good, and you actually want kind of a ratio. Just like when you're starting a fire, you want kindling to be small to get it going. The same is true with tea. You want the little pieces to be there, and they're going to get the tea going. While those chunks are opening up slowly, those little pieces are giving the earlier steepings flavor. So there's kind of an art to balancing the ratio of shake to intact tea cake.
Now, on the Peat Monster episode, we had Stephen Corona from Compass Box was here, and he's a brand ambassador for Texas. And he brought a chunk of peat. And we were noting the similarities between this tea pack and the way that peat actually looks, because essentially peat is vegetation that has been compressed.
Yeah, so somewhere in between compost and coal.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
And you brought us an interesting heavy peated. This is an unusual release for you at Andalusia.
It's unusual for now.
Okay.
But it may be the future of Revenant Oak. So there's been a lot of talk about moving Revenant Oak and changing its profile to be a little more high-end and push towards the peat heads. Okay. So there's this funny thing that happens with a bottle of whiskey. When you put the word peated on it, one of two things happens. Generally, two things happen for us. So traditionally, our Revenant Oak is like a light to moderate peat profile.
Right.
I would say like a peated Highland or Space Side, it's not going to drag you down the street and abuse you. It's like heather and honey. It's a soft kiss goodnight.
The source of your peat, is it the same?
It has traditionally, up until last year, been Irish peat. This is Irish and Scotch peat. So Irish peat that we ordered by way of Amazon, so Amazonian peat, if you will. And then this has two types of Irish peat, and then this also has Scottish peated malt. If memory serves, this is Simpson's Heavy 50 peated malt, so that's 50 ppm on the phenol levels. I did one that's even smokier than this with 70 ppm. Sometime last year, I guess it's been maybe a little over a year now, we made the decision to start using American peat. So we're getting that from North Dakota. That's a whole thing where we're getting it shipped in. It's loose. I have to make mud pies out of it and essentially bake them out in the Texas sun. Mm-hmm. We'll do that all summer long, and then wintertime we'll have peat wheat.
Yeah, this is happening a lot with some of the Canadian malts and some of the west of the U.S. Those malts, they're using their the peat from North America up in Washington, places like that.
Yeah. So
this is essentially grain that was already peated, as well as grain that you has smoked. Yeah.
So on a normal peated whiskey that we have, somebody sees that word peat on there and they're like, well, I don't like Scotch. That's what my grandpa drank, or whatever BS reason they have for not liking Scotch. It generally boils down to the fact that it tastes like an ambulance fire and they don't like smoky Scotch.
Right.
So even if it's an acceptable, really light amount of peat in there that comes off like heather and honey and eucalyptus, where people are like, I hate peat, and then you sneak that to them and they're like, this is delicious. What is it? It's peat.
Right.
This scares them off and they don't want to spend the money on the bottle. Or you get a peat head that comes in, it's like, I'm ready to be slapped around and beat up.
Yeah.
And then you pour them this really light, delicate, right down home plate, lovely, softly peated whiskey. And they're like, well, where's the peat? It's like the old Hostess commercials where the raccoon goes like, where's the cream filling? It's the same thing. It's like, where's all the peat? And so we're kind of losing out on both places. So we might as well just make it hardcore, cater to the peat head. So right now we're slowly undergoing a transformative era of Revenant Oak. I've got it in my head, and I've been talking to Ty about it a lot too. We've been playing and toying with the idea of making it all port or sherry finished, or maybe a mixture of both. Just because traditionally port and sherry play really well with peat. So this is this year's heavily peated Revenant Oak that will be released this fall, aged in a Pedro Ximenez sherry cask. Or being finished in. Not 100% maturation, but being finished in.
So I take it that the Revenant Oak traditionally was a lighter peated, still peated, but less aggressive.
So where this would be probably 60 to 70% of the mash bill being peated malt, traditionally it would be 10 to 12% of the mash bill. And where, just like the tea, where it's grown, where the peat comes from plays a very big part in how it tastes. So I found a lot with the Irish peat, it's soft and heathery and herbaceous and not super aggressive. Where you get into the Islay or Scottish peated malt, they've got that big ambulance fire, the dark phenolic, sometimes leaning into the meatier side of things, but always with the big medicinal and camphor notes, things like that. Where now this American peat that I'm using, I get into that, and it's big and umami, and it's got these big porky, meaty flavors that are a lot like bacon. It's bacony, man.
I heard pork, I heard smoke. I know what you're getting at.
It's huge, and so it's a very different profile. It's big, it's smoky, it's got characteristics of peat from other places. You can tell it's peated, but you put it next to this, which is pretty heavy on the Scottish peat, and it's a wildly different thing.
Cool.
This is why I like to go visit the distilleries. They've got their core range, the things that they do well.
Time.
But yeah, the super smoked, we've had the super smoked
give that
here.
to the turtle. That's going to be a little bit, you can taste it, but it's going to be the rinse. It's a little soft. That's why we throw out the rinse. There's nothing wrong with the rinse. You can definitely drink it. It's not going to hurt you. It's just weak. That's when you compare it to like this next steeping, you can see the color here. You got this like beautiful like black red. But hopefully this will stand up to this peaty whiskey. I like peat. I'm not afraid of peat, so I'm excited for this. My first whiskey, really my first liquor, actually really my first alcohol that I ever enjoyed at the age of like 25, 26, after like I don't like alcohol, was Lafroig. And I know that's like kind of a punchline in the whiskey community, but I like it. I still like it. We had some, 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
We got to have some. That was really, really lovely. Enjoyed it.
So Lafroig, for me, has that big porky, bacony thing. Colila has it. I hear a lot of people say Ardbeg has it for them. For me, it does not. For me, Ardbeg is like strange, smoky pears.
Okay.
Like weird golden fruits with like thick skins, and I don't even know how to describe what I'm trying to tell you. But
Yeah. And then as they
whiskey people understand.
Yeah, as they age, they actually, and this is something that's contrary. A lot of times when you're aging whiskey, you get more wood notes. But with these smoky whiskeys, as they age, they tend to get more dark fruit notes. The smoke turns into things like meat, like smoked meats, and leather and tobacco and all of these other darker notes. When they're young and they're brash, they tend to be a little bit more iodine-y. And this is something that I love visiting the distillery for, is looking for these heavy smoked releases, the heavy smoked striker, the heavy smoked or heavily peated revenants. I love the sherry casks coming out of Andalusia as well. So going to the distillery and getting these exclusive one-off or limited edition releases explores outside of the core range, and it gives the distiller time to play and experiment and find new things and talk to the customer.
Yeah.
Like, what are you liking?
I already like this, just
Yes,
smelling it.
yeah.
Because this is like right in my wheel. This is like right in my wheelhouse of what I like. When I'm thinking about whiskey and I'm like, I want to drink whiskey, crave whiskey, then this is the sort of thing that I'm thinking. Again, I don't drink cocktails except the Ramos Gin Fizz. I'll order one of those at the Sazerac in New Orleans, like an asshole because you're a dick if you order that drink because it takes so long to make. But other than that, I don't like cocktails. I'm gonna be drinking like liquor. I want it to be strong and distinctive and have something going on.
I got salted chocolate caramels by the campfire.
Yeah, definitely.
Right on the nose.
Lots of nice like oak and that like a nice smokiness. I don't think it's like it doesn't come across as like aggressive or over the top smoke wise to me.
No. So before it went into the sherry cask, it definitely had a punchier, brighter creosote note to it. Than just like that big ashy, blatant slap you in the face smoke note. Some people say campfire or ashtray. As somebody who's smoked for a big part of their life, it's definitely not an ashtray, man. But campfire,
it's really nice.
Maybe,
it's really nice.
But the sherry really rounded it out.
Yeah.
It Lebowski'd the whole situation, man. It was like the rug that tied the whole room together. It was looking for something to make the palate cohesive.
Yeah, it's great. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful whiskey. Thank you.
That salted caramel ends up being wrapped with like a cherry cordial, and it lingers. It's really nice.
Oh yeah.
With the tea.
Yeah, this is Pu-erh and whiskey are the classic pairing. That's the classic duo.
Oh, it brings out more campfire and forest and wood malt.
There you go.
We need to get you like a
it's
big
good.
furry hand to crawl in.
Comes creeping into this strange
And like, what's the proof on this?
This is somewhere around 127 proof. So
A little higher than what we've been doing.
Yeah,
This is what made me first fall in love with Lefroy and whiskey in general. The first time I had it was that burn. It's this nice like smoldering burn. And before then, all the alcohol people always like, oh, you don't like alcohol? Here, have this fucking Bacardi ice or like a Smirnoff ice or whatever, like wine cooler thing. And I hated those because I don't like sweet alcohol. But they're always trying to like, oh, well, mix it with this, mix it with that, rum and Coke, whatever, whiskey and Coke to cover this flavor of alcohol. And people kept trying to, oh, you don't like alcohol, you run away from the taste of alcohol. But I really had to just lean into it, and like, this is what, it's a feature.
Alcohol.
And drink better alcohol. Yeah, drink better alcohol. That's what it really comes down to.
It is.
Yeah.
That's where everybody goes wrong. Is they're like, I hate A, B, or C, and it's because you experienced
A shitty
lowercase
version.
A and not capital.
Yeah,
letter A,
exactly. Yeah.
So how like that's a decision that a lot of distilleries are making, is trying to create as much product as possible, and so they bring it down to like 40% ABV. It ends up breaking a lot of those oils down. They fracture. It ends up becoming flatter in the middle, or it can also become more abrasive. So when people are asking, is this smooth? At 40% alcohol, it could just be alcohol and water is all you're tasting, because all of those rich compounds that are attached to those oils are actually dissipated and disappear, and in many cases filtered out. They'll take them away to make it smoother, as a matter of course. So they'll actually run it through charcoal. They'll run it through
chill filter,
chill
bring it
filtering,
to freezing, and
Yeah.
then slam it through a big filter that sucks all those oils out. Those oils are what's holding on to
Making
your
it taste good,
congeners
yeah.
and your phenol compounds. And
Right.
all of that fun stuff is hiding in the oils. That's also what gives you that big thick, viscous mouthfeel and that lingering finish.
Yeah.
That's why when you get into, not to hurt anybody's feelings, but Old Number 7, very flat, one-dimensional whiskey. Always tastes the same. It's very well executed. There's nothing terrible about it. I'm not a fan of the Lincoln County process. We're not going to get too far into Tennessee whiskey. But, when you're serving it to the masses at 80 proof, you bring it down to the point of freezing, you slam it through a bunch of filters, you charcoal filter it, and you just make a big, homogeneous, single profile whiskey that you don't have to try with. It's like drinking a glass of water.
I usually tell people there's three things. There's three things in this glass that carry flavor. There's oil that carries flavor, and then there's water that carries flavor, and there's alcohol that carries flavor. And they're in balance with each other. And if you add water, you break some of that balance, so it changes. So you can add a drop of water and have the evolution. When you're starting off with something at a full cask strength, what are you at, 157? Like, what's the proof on this?
Around 127.
127? So you actually are going to end up breaking that down. You can actually evolve the flavor, find where you like this to taste. Most of the Andalusia releases are at 50.
Yeah.
50%.
And generally, my heavier smoke, so we do the same thing with Striker, so our barbecue smoke, hardwood smoked whiskey. We'll do a heavily smoked version of it where it's 60, 80, 90% smoked malt. And for whatever reason, cask strength buries that smoked flavor. The addition to water and it fighting with all those oils in the distillate are what kind of blow that smoke out. So I find more often than not on the big smoky whiskeys, I like them at 100 proof because it explodes that smoke out when it shows up.
Yeah. It's great though. The smoke is not in front of the wood, it's not in front of the anything, it's just there beside everything.
Yes.
Everything's standing side by side. Nothing's getting out in front of anything else. You can really just get a whole experience from it. And this is like, I really love, getting to try all these different things, but this is the kind of whiskey that when I'm thinking about, like if I was to have a bottle of whiskey, this is the kind of bottle of whiskey that I would be like, okay, this is my bottle of whiskey. It's in my cupboard. When I feel like drinking a drink of whiskey, this is what I want to drink.
And a lot of this for me is like I walk through a liquor store and I look at the bottles and I see people. So I go walk through and I see Iron Root, I see, all of the licorice family on the shelf. I walk through and I see Andalusia and I see Ty and I see Moose and I see Tommy. I see all those people that are over there making this spirit. And I think that ties into what we're doing here with the tea at the tea house. And you still haven't answered, how did you get involved with Andalusia?
Oh, man.
What is your journey? Where did you come from? Where did you go, Cotton Eye Joe?
Well, for 16 years, I repaired paint equipment. So the machines at Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, True Value that actually put color into the cans of colorless paint, I'm the guy that made those work correctly. I calibrated them. I made the software on them work. I repaired the pumps, all the electrical on it. For all basic purposes, I was a low voltage electrician that repaired control panels. I spent an asinine amount of time trying to make computer software work on computers that were way too old to have the software running on. But I did that for 16 years, and I was the West Texas regional manager, which means that I cover everything from Dallas, Texas to Brownsville out to Albuquerque.
Oh, God.
Most people aren't aware that Albuquerque is actually West Texas. So. It is, surprise. A lot of that had me on the road for weeks at a time. I was not a good home brewer as a hobby, which led me into trying to be a distiller. I was a lover of rum, still a lover of rum, which got me into the fermentation of things made from sugar. Also, like I said, bad home brewer. Part of brewing is fermentation, and I wasn't good at fermenting grains. I was pretty good at being able to put warm water on sugar and throw yeast at it, and it makes bubbles and magic juice. And so that gave me, I guess, the confidence and just the basic knowledge of pot distillation on some level. And other than that, it gave me the bug. It gave me the bug, man. So like, I wanted all things spirits. I wanted to know where they came from, the science behind them. Why does rum taste different than whiskey? Why does this whiskey taste different than that whiskey? Why does this wood do different things than this wood? Why does new wood do this and old oak does this? I just wanted to know, and so I just kind of immersed myself in the knowledge and the lore and the history of spirits production. And like I mentioned earlier, I tend to jump headfirst into hobbies and things. I go ape shit with it, man. I just dive headfirst with no helmet.
Nothing wrong with that.
I don't even take my vitamin E.
Yeah.
I just go for it, man.
We're going to get you into tea now.
And so, one day I was coming home from a couple weeks on the road, and my wife was like, yeah, that distillery you're always talking about is finally open to the public. You should swing in and have a glass of whiskey. And, who's going to turn that down? So I stopped in and tried Stryker, became an instant fan. I think at this time their spirits were maybe like a year and a half old. It was just Ty and Tommy and maybe a bartender, maybe not. But it was pretty much those two guys. Doing everything, brewing, cleaning, working the bar, shuffling papers, dealing with everything that a startup distillery goes through. And I showed up and I'm like, well, I have a pot still. I know how to run a pot still. And they're like, okay, sure you do, guy. Have a glass of whiskey. And back then I was in my super nerd mode, so I had notebooks and I was writing down, this whiskey is giving me all this, and I was still going through my pantry and smelling every spice I have, trying to learn what my palate was, how things tasted to me versus how they taste to, we'll say like a Ralphie on YouTube. He was one of my first guys that I really paid attention to how he tasted things.
Right.
And I like that he's old and grumpy and just doesn't give a shit about what anybody else thinks. I feel that, man, in my soul.
Nice hats,
there's
too.
a fair amount of convention going on with that guy. And, I like it. I went in there with my notebook and I'm like, oh, well, this tastes like this, this, and this. And then I just started showing up. Anytime I was driving down 281, I'd swing in there real quick and like, you guys got anything I can do? Can I help? Can I learn? And they're like, yeah, take that trash bag out or whatever. Shovel this pile of grain. Go help the brewer do this. Go help Ty do this.
Yeah.
One day I pulled up and they were trying to put an overhead crane, a very small overhead crane in. And they were trying to wire up the remote, and Tommy was shocking himself repeatedly. And it just so happens that I understand electricity a little bit. And, so I got up there. I was like, all right, let's stop this and let me do this. And I did that. And that was kind of the point where they're like, he might be worth something. So I was like, oh, they like me, man. I'm going to bring them a resume. So I typed up this resume and a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with whiskey. And one line in there is like basic understanding of fermentation and pot distillation. And I gave them the resume and they just crumpled it up and threw it in the trash can. They already knew who I was. They knew I didn't have anything industry related. Yeah. And the alcohol industry is one of those things that without prior experience, you don't get in. So how do you get prior experience? You do that old school thing, man. You show up and you make yourself an asset. You sweep floors, you shovel grain until they say, hey, watch the still. I got to run to the hardware store. And then you do that. And then eventually they're like, well, what do you think about this cut? Where do you think we're at? Would you keep this product or would you not? And it turns out I'm a pretty picky bastard. So I'm like, I'm not keeping this. I'm not keeping this. I'm like, oh, okay, well, we know he's not going to poison the masses. So they let me start running the still. And it just kind of snowballed into that. And like I said, we were a really small team, so at some point it was about just showing ownership over the production room and saying, I've got this, you guys go upstairs and do all your stupid phone meetings, or move pile of paper A to place B, and I'll move container of liquid A to place B, and we'll just work in unison. And it just became a kind of a catastrophic symphony, and we've found our way around it, and it's a tight-knit family, man. It was about showing up and just making it mine, whether they needed me to or not, and I just wanted to be a part of it, so I showed up and made it mine.
So that original,
and I wasn't gonna leave whether they made me leave.
There you go. That original still, they actually, to dump it out, they had a pallet jack to lift it up. It was just a big giant copper pot still, and they just jacked it up, tipped it that way. Everything was pretty well jury rigged. So having that,
I mean, the drain was on the side of it, and everybody knows drains work best when placed on a wall and not the floor. So to get liquid to drain out of the wall, yeah.
Right.
the mill came from Treaty Oak.
Real ale.
Real ale. There we
ale.
go, for milling the grains.
Yep.
So a lot of
their beginning existence. I'd have to look at the date on the mill, but I want to say like 15 years of their existence. That little mill that we've got milled all their stuff, and then I don't know that we'll ever outgrow it. It does a lot of stuff that it probably does more than we need it to. Yeah, and we're not a beer brewery, so those guys run through a bunch of grain. We're actually, it's on its retirement plan right now. It's having an easy life. It does get run 4 times a week, but it's not all day, every day. 3 times a day, 4 times a day.
And those original barrels were aged out in the middle of shipping containers.
They were.
And now, what do you got now? It's blown up.
A rick house of sorts. It's really fun. The building is a 60 by 40 just metal building, and for about the first year of its existence, we just had loose 200 barrels sitting on the floor of it. You kind of had to hop and skip and jump over all of them, and it took about an hour to find anything you were looking for. And but then we got a bunch of lovely racking systems from France by a company called Oxaline.
They're gorgeous.
And where traditional racking systems would stack barrels on top of each other, kind of in Lincoln log fashion. For one, it's hard to pull samples out of a barrel when you've got something right on top of it. You can't pull that bung out of the bung hole. Makes it a little hard to harvest whiskey from. You run into things where you've got things stacked in the back left-hand corner of the warehouse, and you need to test that one barrel. Well, the only way to get to it is to move the entire rest of the warehouse to get to that one pallet that's got your barrel on it. So after a bunch of looking at different barrel racking systems, from the traditional Kentucky-style rick house, where the ricks or racks are the structure of the building. They are what keeps the building up, which would be ideal and super cool and a romantic idea, but it was in the midst of COVID. Everything was expensive. Everything's still expensive. Wood was not the way to go. Lumber was outrageous. The amount of barrels we could put into a 60 by 40 area was about 500 barrels. And that kind of seemed to be this number that was sticking out, 400 to 500, 600 barrels on the good end, and couldn't really break that end. So comes this French racking system where the barrels are staggered like stair steps, which leaves the bung spot open about this much. You can pull a bung out, you can stick a thief in, you can see all sides of a barrel, and it stacks up real nice and neat like Legos. Allowed us to put 1,000 barrels in the same 60 by 40 spot, so almost twice as many barrels as traditional racking solutions. And so that's what we went with. It's geared towards the winemaking, sherry world and stuff like that. But it works quite well for our purposes. Had we been a bourbon company where we have to discard a barrel after every use, it would be a nightmare because of the way it works. We can't move full barrels, so an empty barrel has to go into a spot, it has to be filled in that spot, it has to be emptied in that spot. But the fact that we're going to reuse a barrel 3 and 4 times allows me to leave that barrel in that spot and be completely lazy about it. Say, get a piece of chalk and mark it with an E when that barrel's empty, and then I've got a tank full of rum ready to go into a different bunch of barrels, and I go find all my ones marked with E, and we fill them up, and there we go.
So it's not just whiskey. I've had brandy. I've had rum. There's new make that's over there. What am I missing? There's got to be a whole lot more you're working on. Was there an Irish cream at one point?
We make an Irish cream. We don't sell it. We are in the process. I think I can talk about this. We'll make it vague and mysterious. So we are working on some RTDs are ready to drink cocktails. That will be coming out soon, and we do a little bit of contract distilling for other people, like Crowded Barrel from time to time. A lot of what I'm trying to get into now is like custom cask finishing too. So, say we've got some guys, we'll throw just because I hung out with the DFW Rum Club today. Say those guys call me up and they're like, "Oh, well, like I'm really infatuated with this port finish rum from wherever." Well, it gives me a chance to look through my rum barrels and say what would go good. Maybe I've got this barrel that's not really incorporating a lot into the spirit, and we'll throw it into a sherry cask for a little while, or a port cask, or whatever they want. Or maybe, they won't. They're like, "Do you have a Tokai cask?" Well, no, but I will buy one now.
Okay.
And so it's you do whatever you want.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Whenever I see Moose at festivals and fairs and stuff, he's always got something weird and different in the backpack that he wants people's opinions. It's like a chef, where you're trying new things, and you've got a certain group of people that you value their opinions, and some of the people that we've had here are those people. So when Marshall comes down, it's like Moose has something special for Marshall.
Right, and he's generally got a backpack full of weird rums that I cannot afford.
You're right.
Like we talked about, I don't get out to the liquor store. I don't experience that part of the world anymore. So if Marshall or Randall Jenks shows up, they've generally got things from out and about that I can't get, that you can't get in Texas, you know.
Yeah.
And then I get to bounce my products and my ideas off of these things that they're bringing me. Or sometimes I just get confronted by a beer company that's got, a couple kegs of something weird, and they're like, well, what do we do with it? I'm like, I don't know what we do. We can run it through the still. I'm not promising anything good will happen. And then we end up with this really weird thing that where most beer schnapps I'm not a fan of, or hopped whiskeys. But, maybe it comes out tasting like a gin, so you throw it in a barrel and see what happens. And it'll probably be the closest I ever get to making a gin. But when it comes out, we'll do something weird with it. I've got that sitting in casks. I've got some weird things sitting around. Some of them will probably never see the light of day. I want to do a barrel-aged absinthe. Is there a market for it?
Probably
not really, man. I want to do it, but I can't just throw a whole barrel away because I want to make some absinthe that nobody's going to drink. It's just going to be me in the rick house drilling holes in a barrel.
Find a little tree house to put it in. Call it a green fairy. You're good to go.
I mean, I bet someone's gonna want that. I'm sure someone's gonna want that.
Right. But they got to tell me they want it first.
So thank you very much for coming here today. And this is all about friends and experiments and relationships and adventures. And I'm glad you guys are here for the adventure. Moose, it was great having you here talking
thanks for
about,
having me.
You've been there at Andalusia for, nearly since the beginning.
Since 2018.
Yeah.
They opened 2016.
2016, yeah.
And then I showed up as a volunteer for the second anniversary party. So I've been around there being a thorn in their side since they were about a year and a half.
Well, we appreciate the thorniness of your side.
Oh.
Cheers. It's nice having you here. And join us here. We're bringing interesting people to talk about whiskey and tea. Come on over to West China Tea. Check out Sohan. Do you have anything that you're promoting right now?
Well, when is this coming out?
This will probably be 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. Well, we're having a sale right now, but it's not going to be happening by the time this comes out. But we're moving. I-35 is going to tear this place down, and we just bought our first brick and mortar that we own. Thank you, on East 7th Street.
Awesome.
So come visit this place before it's gone.
East 7th and
East 7th and Chacon.
Yeah.
East 7th and Chacon.
A couple blocks away from where the legendary White Swan used to be, which was a fun punk dive back in the day.
Perfect.
And then it turned into a weird hot dog restaurant, and then those people moved to Houston and opened up another punk rock dive.
Yeah, East Texas is East Austin is really eclectic, so I think that you'll do well there.
Yeah, no, I think so too, absolutely. Well, and by the way, this is Manula Shou that we're drinking. It's just like a good everyday drinker, dark, funky shou pour. And fermented, it's going to age well. It's already got a little bit of
This is my
age
favorite
on it.
one we've had.
This is when people come in and they're like, I like whiskey, I serve them Pu-erh. I serve them shou pour because this is the type of tea that really meshes with that profile of whiskey. You've got like earthy and oaky and lumber and
It's got a
tobacco
good amount of
and
like
leather.
tannin in it.
Yeah. And you can also put a bit of Trump putting it in the whiskey. You know, it's a thing that we
So
do.
that's one of my favorite like summertime like mow the yard drinks is whiskey and a glass of unsweetened iced tea. Like bourbon, any nondescript bourbon that I don't really care about. Wild Turkey 101, just like big shot of that and a glass of unsweetened iced tea.
Try
Cheers.
it. We call it Puski, whiskey and Pu-erh. It's Puski, but awesome. Cheers. Let me get a cup of something, and then I'll cheers y'all. And
Here's to tea and whiskey and good friends and experiments.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Cheers.
Cheers.